But our final act, our final story is this. It's been bad enough in lockdown for most of us, but imagine if your job was all about moving and not staying put. Travel journalism. As the sky emptied of planes and we were all completely grounded, all that travel writers could do was sit in their bedrooms and reread their old cuttings. Oh. Yes. We'd like to meet one. He'd rather be in a war zone than in an office, and knowing that journalists can turn their hand to anything, well, in terms of writing anyway, we asked him, just for fun, to write his own obituary. So looking very well considering, here's James Ruddy.
Well, thanks for that, Kathy. The checks in the post, very glowing indeed, as usual. Hello, Wandsworth. I think I'm from Nottingham, so I haven't got a clue where I really am. But never mind about that. What a great audience. What happened? Did Emmerdale finish early or something? Anyway, was it Shea Bruce's run out of tables down there? Anyway, I've got 6 minutes for the obituary, and being the oldest person here by a factor of 2.5 in the team, I'm having to use bullet points, and excuse as a war journalist the pun, but that's the way it is for me. Anyway, 40 years as a war journalist, and I've been to lots of what Boris might call red list countries. I call them tin hat places. Very similar, in fact. You know, you won't get back in a hurry, that's for sure. Had a few narrow escapes. Several of them were in Battersea, and some were even in Clapham. So that was pretty dodgy. A bit of audience input here. Anyway, this comes from my dad, really, because he was a Godfather fan. Now, he always said to me, he said, Jimbo, he said, keep your friends close and your enemies closer, as we know. So the cheer and boo section's coming up, okay? All happy with that? Right, okay. Recent co-op survey said that journalists were the most distrusted people in Britain after, get it, politicians, yeah, and estate agents, of course. So you may or may not believe in that, but let's have a cheer if you trust journalists. I'll be buying a lot of drinks after this, I can see that. Let's have a boo if you don't trust journalists. The door's that way. Yeah, okay. So that's pretty interesting, actually. Anyway, back to the career, the obituary. Here we go. Born in a little market town called Gainsborough, quaint little fishing village on the Trent, and now live in Nottingham, a larger, quaint little fishing village on the Trent. Born to Irish parents, went to a convent with Irish nuns, as you do. As soon as you walk through the door, before you could do your first genuflection in the 1970s, they converted your name to the Irish version. So James became Seamus, so I was Seamus Ruddy for 18 years, come thick or thin. Now Gainsborough was a bit of a kind of redneck place at the time, you know, you can think about it, a little fishing village on the Trent, and so the IRA weren't doing some great things at the time either, and a name like Seamus Ruddy didn't go down brilliantly. So in the local football team I was known as Trip Switch, and if I walked into a pub with a backpack on I was asked if it was ticking. I got spots occasionally, and I was called Bumpy at the time, and there's a guy near me, he used to go into the same pub and he had buck teeth. He was asked if he was a local pie crimper with grim regularity. They called it banter, we call it hate crime, you know. Anyway, the good thing about it, I survived, but that was largely thanks to the boxing lessons at the convent, not by the nuns. We did have two male teachers who'd like to see us beating hell out each other as 9-year-olds every afternoon. That went quite well. There were a few boxing nuns as well, as we all know. Anyway, the career, right, back to this. So first, trainee journalist, had to apply to thousands of newspapers to get a job those days. So the Daily Mail picked me up for some strange reason as a trainee. What they didn't realise, or they did realise, was I was a trainee Trotskyite, which didn't go down well with the Daily Mail. And so they sent me to their version of the Northwest Frontier, which was Scunthorpe. Okay, so I spent 3 years in Scunthorpe trying to become a journalist, and that was like Dodge City in the 1970s. Fraud aplenty, murder aplenty, contractors beating hell out of each other in a Wild West sort of scenario, and that was just the office. But then the real job came, and I moved to Norfolk, you know, to the heartland of crime and fraud. And for some strange reason, I was sent immediately to wars. So I came to Norfolk because it was pretty and quiet, and I got sent off to war zones for some odd reason. So Northern Ireland, the Falklands, Bosnia, Sudan, Sierra Leone all seemed to hit my sort of red list agenda. I kept coming back alive, as you can see. I kept getting sent again. I kept asking why, and they kept saying low hotel expenses. They also said my lack of a shell-shock stare, which I think I've got a pretty good one actually. Perhaps they just wanted to get rid of me, and that occurred to me on a number of occasions. Anyway, I fought back after a number of these trips, and I did what's known as compassion journalism. Sounds like a contradiction in terms, and it is actually. But I was quite a rarity at the time, so I started, rather than just reporting on war, rescuing children. So I joined up with UNICEF, MSF, HHC, etc., etc. Started in Bosnia. Now, the first project was 30 children, and they all fell below the sort of UN criteria for injury. They weren't injured enough, for the UN to evacuate them and get them fixed. So we picked 30 kids who were just below that, gunshot wounds, shrapnel wounds, etc. Brought them to the UK, and they were scattered around hospitals all over the UK. Good old NHS was at it those days, back in the 80s and 90s. And they were sent home, and they were fixed largely, these kids, with all those incredible injuries. Then I went to Sierra Leone and repeated the exercise during the 10-year civil war there. In fact, I went to Sierra Leone an unlucky 13 times for some odd reason. Just kept going back, and I rescued some children from there using the funds from readers of the newspapers in East Anglia. And amongst them was a little girl called Teddy Cole. Now, she was a 5-year-old. And if I can give you some advice, if you're ever around anybody firing a Kalashnikov in the air, put a tin hat on your head, find a saucepan or something similar, because what goes up comes down. And this little girl was running away from a village that was being attacked. The rebels were celebrating. The round went up in the air and came straight to the top of her head, split the right frontal lobe and ended up just below the right eye, severing the optic nerve. So I brought her into England, and she was treated at the Norfolk Norwich Hospital. The bullet was taken out, and I saw her 3 years ago for ITN, and she's now a seamstress just outside Freetown. She's got her own business, and she's a very happy young woman.
James, can I have one more minute?
Oh yeah, got it. Right, whizzing through. Okay. Anyway, yeah. So we'll move on. For instance, I met some strange people in my time. A blonde-haired bloke called Boris once in Beijing. I was going off to North Korea, and he told me he wanted to go with me. Luckily, security stepped in and prevented him from getting there. So thankfully, I had an interesting week there without Boris. But I did actually have a great time with a busload of Chinese drug reps on a booze cruise from Beijing, who joined me on the train, and every time I bowed at a great leader bronze statue, all I could hear from behind me was, "On a Heineken, Mr. James." What drove me to do what journalists aren't supposed to do, be kind to people in war zones? Was it adrenaline rush? No. Was it a liking for flat jackets and camouflage underpants? Possibly. Was it that I thought I was the Latter-day St. Nicholas, swooping in with sackloads of goodness for those in need? Certainly not. It was my children, actually, Jared and Jana. They punched me one day watching TV when they saw the refugees in Bosnia on the box, and said, "Dad, do something about it." My daughter even gave me her favourite teddy bear, which I gave to a small child in Sarajevo who was dying in a bed. And I hope it helped him in knowing someone somewhere cared about him at that difficult moment of his life. Who knows anyway? None of us really do we? On that note, I'll stop waffling. My 6 minutes are up. Thank you, Catherine. I hope it's helped you to rebuild trust in journalists, and let's have another cheer. You've been great.